As the federal government prepares to completely deregulate the downstream sector of the Nigerian oil and gas industry in the coming months, stakeholders in the sector have told Nigerians to be ready to pay as much as 750 naira per litre of fuel at filling stations. This was the high point of the stakeholders' intervention during an online workshop with the theme Deregulation of the Nigerian Sector. The day after, the workshop was organized by industry stakeholders in collaboration with African Refiners and Distributors Association, ARDA. The downstream players, in conjunction with economic policy analysts and relevant government agencies, also outlined strategies and measures that should be deployed to ensure sustainable removal of petrol subsidies. It emerged yesterday also that Nigeria was struggling to find buyers for its crude oil, as strikes in French refining sector and seasonal maintenance in the plant somewhere else in Europe, cuts in the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC sales, producer sales quotas. A lot has to be said about this, Ayo.
Yes, absolutely. Now, just straight to the point, it's important to realize that the deregulation of the sector, the petroleum sector, particularly the removal of fuel subsidy, is one of the provisions of the Petroleum Industry Act. And President Muhammadu Buhari has stated it quite clearly that he's keen to ensure that he complies with the provision of the Act, one of which is the removal of petrol subsidy. The Finance Minister, Zainab Ahmed, has said this a number of times and talked about the government's plan to gradually, preferably gradually remove subsidy rather than just take off the band-aid and remove it all of a sudden. There's no doubt as to the importance of, or the benefits of the full removal of subsidy. This has been enumerated a number of times by stakeholders, by players in the industry, and by international bodies as well. Earlier this year, the World Bank and the IMF had said that it was important for Nigeria to remove subsidy in order to achieve its developmental plans and lift people out of poverty, so that we can rechannel resources to other, projects, other infrastructural development in the country. Therefore, there's no doubt as to the importance of the removal of subsidy. However, in previous times when this has been attempted, there have been a number of protests and resistance to it, chief of which is the resultant effect on the Nigerian people in terms of the suffering of the common man. What has been the argument that has been put forward is that if subsidy is removed, people are going to suffer. When you increase the price of petrol from, as it was done way back in 2012, by almost over 100% increase, people are going to suffer. Nigerians came out en masse to protest. However, 11 years later, the conversation is still on in terms of the fact that it is as a matter of necessity and urgency to do this so that we can save up to, according to this stakeholders meeting, 12 trillion naira in 4 years. And that money could then be plowed back into doing more infrastructural projects for Nigeria, health sector, education, and a number of projects that this money can be best channeled to. So what these players also spoke about at this meeting was a plan. I believe there are certain lessons that we can learn from the Naira redesign policy, whereby we see a good plan, which is for the ultimate good of Nigeria, highlighting the benefits, but if not well marshaled out, could actually do the exact opposite in terms of exacerbating the sufferings of Nigerians. Therefore, it's great that we're having conversations like this. And then at this point, to talk about the role and the place of the Nigerian National Orientation Agency, and the fact that the government ought to be open and transparent in conversations with the Nigerian people. Let's begin to sensitize people that this is coming, understand the benefits, so that people get used to the idea of the removal of subsidy. The other part of this as well, a lesson we can learn from the Naira redesign policy and how it was affected, is the fact that what Nigerians want to see is transparency. And the fear that has come up a number of times is the fact that when subsidy is removed, the money that's saved from subsidy removal is rechanneled, is corruptly managed. Therefore, we are back to square one again. So what people want to say is that once you're able to actualize this, you demonstrate to Nigerians that the savings from removal of subsidy is being put to good use. That's the second part. The final part I'll mention is also how we can help to provide a safety net for Nigerians who will be affected by the removal of subsidy in terms of the hardship that will be faced by Nigerians. A number of people have proposed, proposed solutions to this. Some people have talked about perhaps a subsidy, a grant given to transport users to provide a better infrastructure for Nigerians to use. But one thing I must emphasize that's come out from this project is this, or from this program is this: it is important. We have to bite the bullet because ultimately it is for the good of Nigeria and Nigerians.
Well, the removal of subsidy is what many Nigerian economics and also foreign observers, including the IMF and the World Bank, had recommended. Because one, it is not sustainable. Two, Nigeria had been maintaining this subsidy for a very long time, doing the same thing that does not work. Again, getting bad results. Number three, it's certainly a question of time. And it's interesting because in 2012, the government of Nigeria tried to remove subsidy. Nigerians kicked against it. It was called, deregulation of the downstream sector in 2012. But the irony that we now face is that the same people who organized protests, who led protests, who gave jollof rice and designer T-shirts for people to disrupt disturb public peace in parts of the country, they are now the ones who ironically will be saddled with the responsibility of going back to 2012 and doing what we did not do at that time. At that time, I remember that a number of economists during the debate at that time had said that, look, Nigeria should remove subsidy gradually in order to minimize the pain, the burden on the average Nigerian. Now what is being proposed is a complete removal. In line with the provisions of the Petroleum Industry Act, the final enactment of which, is one of the, positive things that this administration can claim. But when you remove it wholesale, after the government had dilly-dallied over the complete deregulation of the downstream sector, now they're saying that by May 29, it will be removed. And when it is removed, this becomes a major issue for the next administration. Now, we're told it will remove a fiscal deficit burden. It would, it will lessen fiscal deficit. It will, reduce forex volatility. So there may well be opportunities, but there are also challenges. At a workshop over the weekend, online workshop, stakeholders in the sector are saying, okay, they support government removing subsidy, but this could mean that, you could buy fuel for as much as 750 naira per litre. IPMAN expressed the opinion that if forex is made available at official rate, I don't know whether we should have official rate or parallel market rate, but their suggestion from IPMAN is that the price could go down to 500 naira. But even at 500 naira, many Nigerians will still complain. So government has a responsibility to manage the process, to enlighten the public so that people don't just wake up June 1 and they go to the filling stations and they have issues. Two, how do they guarantee stock? You have to guarantee stock. One of the suggestions at the online workshop also is that the savings from the subsidy should be used to provide palliatives for people. Now, this was the same approach in 2012. Some of the suggestions with regard to agricultural produce, with regard to public transportation, we've tried it before. Are we going to be able to get it right this time? So, how do you also deal with the resentment of the people? Because organized labor is likely to come forward and say, no, get the refineries to work. Do this, do that. Palliatives should be structured in this particular manner. And then, of course, the cost of everything will go up. But what is certain is that this is something we could have dealt with, in phases 12 years back. But now we have to take the bitter pill at this time. I don't think it's going to be easy for the average Nigerian if you have to buy fuel at 750 naira per litre. Already now, a lot of people buy at over 200 naira, but 750 naira per liter. You can imagine that the cost of everything will go up. We're told that there is food inflation in the country. People are still, eating maybe twice a day. Maybe some people will end up eating once a day. Public transportation will also go up because the cost in terms of transportation will be shifted to the already overburdened Nigerian people. And landlords will also, increase rent, you can imagine, which is the part of it that I always find curious, because buildings that were put up at a time a bag of cement was just 100 naira. The landlord will tell you that the cost of cement has gone up, as if he's going to buy new cement to mix new blocks in a 20-year-old building. But that's the kind of knock-on effect that you're likely to have. One other important recommendation that came out of that workshop is about oil theft. Oil theft, that Nigeria needs to do something about crude oil theft, and that we're not doing enough. Then there has to be real professionalism on the part of the midstream and upstream authority, regulatory authority, otherwise known as the authority, created under Section 31, subsection 1 of the Petroleum Industry Act. Free market economics, market forces, no more subsidy. Well, we'll wait and see. It makes economic sense, but how about the social consequences, to borrow a phrase on the basis of which the Buhari administration decided to move the matter to the next administration?
So I think it was the 1700s. Let me take you back. A certain man called Adam Smith wrote a book about the inquiry into what makes up the wealth of nations. And in that book, he propounded a lot of theory, talked a lot about demand and supply and how nations pretty much make their money. Where Nigeria is today is the lack of understanding of how to create wealth for its people. And that's why we're talking about subsidies. So how did the subsidy come about? I'll tell you how it came about. In the 70s, something happened. 73, Yom Kippur War happened. There had been a war raging in the East. Crude oil prices went up from about $3 per barrel to about $12 per barrel. Then, because of the international pricing, crude definitely was more expensive. So the rebate on the refining of crude became a problem. So the government started subsidies and cushioning the effect for a lot of Nigerians. But the thing about Yom Kippur War is that Nigeria made a lot of money. So the question is, what did we invest the money in? Could we have invested the money in expanding our economy to be able to cushion the effect long-term on the increase in petrol prices? No, we didn't. I tell you what we invested our money in: the cement armada. We bought tons and tons of cement. There was a lot of contract fraud in government and all of that. And we know how that continued. The cement armada blacklisted us internationally. All the gains we had made in the 70s, by the 80s, things started to go kaput. The economy was not good. 83, we all know what happened. From a thriving economy in the 70s because we didn't invest rightly, to an economy in the 80s that was already down on its knees. And Naira lost its value in 86. Then things continue from there. And that's the problem. In fact, only yesterday I was looking at a This Week magazine of the 80s that was talking about the push to remove subsidies on petrol. I said 80s, late 80s. So it's not today we've been talking about it. And we continued with a model. What are the problems on ground? The solution to this problem is to be able to revitalize our petroleum sector internally so that modular refineries can be able to produce at a certain capacity to meet market demands locally. I believe strongly Nigeria can be a net exporter of refined petrol. But we need to make investments and concessions. Till date, modular refineries still have to buy their crude in US dollars, which is a big problem for them because they can hardly get the forex. When you solve that problem, also be transparent. I think it's the transparency people complain about. It is the lack of transparency. That's why we have crude oil theft and some other sundry problems and all of that. When you are transparent, you incentivize the local sector, there's a whole lot more production, then you can have so much surplus and price will regulate. The 750, I'm a little bit iffy about that number. Yeah, because in that paper, they cited a lot of external factors, which might not get better now, which might get better soon. But when price definitely moderates, it's going to be about 500 like they say. But the truth is, we cannot be depending on the external factors of importation. The long-term solution to the problem will be looking inwards and ensuring that we have the same refined products internally to be able to buffer the extra costs of forex and some other things that we pay in subsidy. That's the long-term solutions. Dr. Abata, you talked about 2012. Yes, we had a good time to pull it out in 2012, But we all bungled it because it was politically convenient for us then. And so everybody made the plot and called President Goodluck Jonathan the villain. But obviously those that called Goodluck Jonathan the villain see the point now, because then it made economic sense, but Nigerians followed sentimental sense. And the truth of the matter is, in logical, empirical conversations, we always make the mistake of following the biggest sentiment in the room, not the biggest logic in the room. So where we used to be over 10 years ago, where we shut down this country for the first 2 weeks on the 1st of from the 1st of January 2012 because of this same problem we've not been able to solve. That's what people call a scam. The long-term solution will be ensuring that we produce more oil within and be able to block the leakages and allow NNPC to be accountable to tell us how much they are even lifting every day and sort out the fiscal part. Then we can vitalize the economy and be net exporters. Moving on, Nigerian women gathered over the weekend to celebrate the International Women's History Month at the British Deputy High Commissioner's residence in Lagos. The focus centered on addressing equity gaps and providing funding tips for Nigerian women entrepreneurs. Arise correspondent Ozzy Okoli reports.
To commemorate International Women's History Month in March, the UK Nigerian Tech Hub and Google for Startups Africa organized 2 panel discussions at the British Deputy High Commissioner's residence in Lagos, titled Venture Journey, Addressing Equity Gaps.
There is not a better time to be speaking about the subject that we're here for today. The world's population consists of 50% women compared to men, but you find that there's a huge disparity in the access that women have to funding for their businesses. And as part of our work at the UK Nigeria Tech Hub, as an offshoot of the digital access program by the UK government in Nigeria, we want to pay focus to the women folk. We understand that in moving Africa's digital economy forward, a good focus on the group that is not at par currently will give us the highest mileage that we can ever record. Going at the pace that we currently are, it might take us over 200 years to achieve that parity. So we're stimulating conversations where, we can gather early stage founders and investors in the same room to sort of have conversations around what investors are looking out for and to hear from the founders' perspective what their experiences have been. We also have in this room female founders that have successfully raised money in the past, and they're here to tell us their journey and to speak to the upcoming female founders. This is a mentorship event, right? 50% of the people here are early stage founders who are looking to raise money. The other 25% are investors, and the other are female founders who have raised money.
Well, I think what we've seen today is a continuation of our commitment to supporting tech and women in tech. And just last week, earlier this week, in fact, we launched the UK's global tech strategy. And today what we're doing is looking at a collaboration with Google, specifically on $3 million worth of kind of credit that female businesses and business owners in the tech space can engage with. And that's coupled with the work we've already done ourselves on the Future Females Business School and the Angels Academy, essentially Angels Academy around trying to encourage investment in female tech across Africa, but here in Nigeria, and the Future Females Business School really looking at how we can get women involved and empowered and able to benefit, frankly, from the opportunities that Nigeria has. So it's a tough space. I mean, it's a good space, tech, but it's a tough space to make progress. So really, we're trying to do everything we can to support women in that space.
The events, which gathered female founders, investors, and ecosystem stakeholders seeking for funds, is also aimed at helping women startups to understand the technology of funding and how to be positioned to get funded.
For me, it's largely the bias of just believing that the man is going to do a better job than the woman, and that is just not correct. Okay, so we're hoping that there's going to be a lot more awareness. There's going to be a lot more affirmation towards women that will encourage more investments to come in to female-led, female-owned businesses. We're advocating that the successful ones should be celebrated because there is a great thing about role modeling. Okay, she has done it. It means I can do it.
Nigeria is a significant player on the African landscape. We have the biggest tech ecosystem on the continent. We attract the biggest amount of venture dollars in Africa. But also we have an incredible founder base with a lot of grit, resilience, perseverance, and people who know how to build real solutions for real problems.
By supporting women-led technology businesses in Nigeria and promoting digital inclusion, the journey to an equitable venture surely has taken off. Ozzy Okoli, Arise News.
Right, I mean, a lot to talk about this, Ayo and
Yes.
Dr. Batu.
I'm really glad that we're able to take this focus, being International Women's Month. I just want to say that with what has been highlighted, PwC in a report last year had mentioned that 41% of MSMEs are owned by women in Nigeria, and obviously that would eat into the tech space. And the reason why we're talking tech is because part of the International United Nations theme for this year's International Women's Day is Tech for All, leveraging tech to promote gender equity, gender equality. Gender equity is one of the sustainable development goals. However, we are not on the path to achieving this in the very near future, particularly in this part of the world. Look at the recent elections. Out of 469 seats, women were able to only gain 17 seats in the House. Therefore, when we talk about policy and policy development, how will we develop policies that are gender-friendly when we do not have a clear representation, despite the fact that we have 49% of the population being women? It is not representative at all. I hope that the next government will include more women in terms of roles and ministerial positions. Very important.
Well, the tech space is a space that is doing well in Nigeria. Increasingly, we're seeing many of these tech startups, some of them with international connections. So the whole idea of devoting the UK, Nigeria tech startup to the celebration of women who are making an effort in that area, I think is a good idea. And it will encourage other women in that particular space. There are 2 or 3 women who are leading some of those thriving tech startups. But if you compare to the number of men in that space, it's still very small compared to how it's a male-dominated space. So I think part of it should be celebrating women. Addressing the subject of equity is also important. And also mentoring, role modeling. Those should be very important so that the few women who are doing very well in that tech space will also encourage other women to focus in that area. And at the level of education, we still need to do a lot more in terms of STEM and getting as many women, young girls as possible, to take advantage of education in that direction.
I mean, a lot has to be said about women in tech. There's a far-reaching level of marginalization, but I think the problem starts with capital, really. Why is it that most of the capital goes to male-founded companies rather than female-founded companies? So can we have a sort of like impact investment scheme and network that capital now becomes targeted at female co-founders? Because if you have a lot of that, then you can be able to iterate the capital base over time. Also, the predominant problem about women not participating effectively in politics is because of capital. Capital is a big problem. You need money to be able to run. So can we also have targeted impact investment for like a pool of funds for women that want to go into political office so that they will be able to run and get that money to be able to run at the same time, as it is with other sectors. But in terms of also governance, we have a lot of women doing quite well that are really qualified. So it is the capacity to be able to take the stand decisions of saying, let's put a woman here because she's the best competent person for the job in this regard. So I think the problem really is about the targeted funding quota that the men get over the women. But once that is equalized to a certain extent, definitely we'll have that. And many corporations are doing that already. It can only get better.